Welcome everybody to Sunday morning at the Marxist Library. Before the pandemic, our organization, the Institute for the Critical Study of Society, met at the Marxist Library in Oakland, California, and we're continuing that association today virtually. Our meeting today will be 2 hours long. Our speaker will speak in the first half, and in the second half, we'll have a question and answer and discussion period. As our name implies, we're a Marxist group, and we're interested in looking at society from a scientific point of view, which of course involves a deep study of Marxist philosophy and ideas. We're not a sectarian group. We welcome all persons who have a serious interest in the problems of the day. Hopefully we're not sectarian. Usually our sessions are focusing on politics or economics, but today will be a little bit different, and in an important way, we'll be focusing on science. And actually, it seems like the intersection of science and politics. Our speaker is Yusuf Gürsey, who originates from Turkey, where he was a physics professor for many years. Currently, he's living in Connecticut in the United States, and since his retirement, he's taken on a vast array of studies. I won't detail them. You can look them up on the email. It's too much to include, but several of the areas are related to linguistics. And his talk today will focus on Stalin's the essay, The Problems of Linguistics. I didn't write down the full name, but you can see it there. So with that, I will open it up and turn over the meeting to Yusuf Gürsey, our speaker today. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me first send condolences to the people in Turkey and Syria for the terrible tragedy, natural tragedy compounded by the political situation. Next week there is a program in Turkey, when perhaps we'll go more in detail about it. Thank you. This is about Stalin's work, Joseph Stalin's work, Marxism and Problems of Linguistics, and a very good both from a linguistic scientific point of view and from a political point of view. To understand this, Stalin was Georgian, as everybody knows, and this Georgian linguist, Nikolai Marr, had some peculiar theories and peculiar views about linguistics. He nevertheless, he did important research and field work, in the field about the languages of Caucasia. Another Georgian, other Soviet linguists, including this Arnold Chkobava, were severely critical of him. He died in 1934, but his disciples took over. But finally, there was outcry over his theories. Stalin weighed in and made a very wise choice. Okay, first of all, he had a theory about the origin of language, that it originated as gestures, and somehow an elite, this is in prehistoric times, invented vocal language and imposed it. And for some unjustified reason, he believed that all language originated from these 4 syllables, sal, ber, yon, rosh. And he rejected what's called the historical comparative method. That means that you compare a number of living or attested languages, compare their core vocabulary. Or obviously, you won't include words like telephone and computer, but their core vocabulary, body parts, things related to everyday life. And when you compare them, you deduce that they originated from some proto-form. This has been very successful. Like if you compare the Romance languages, you'll get something that resembles late Latin, especially Latin of the more popular works, and graffiti. And if you compare Turkic languages, you'll get something that resembles very much what is, except Chuvash and Yakut and maybe Khalaj. These are lesser known Turkic languages. So if you compare them, and you get something that you could deduce that you get something resembling the old Turkic. In terms of Indo-European was established as a family this way, and it was deduced that to explain some changes in the vowels, that the original language had some what were called pharyngeal consonants, and when Hittite was deciphered, it was found that in the predicted spots, it was represented by the cuneiform consonant ch. So it actually, you want some a scientific theory to have predictive power. So this does actually did actually pass that test. In terms of linguistics, Marx thought that the Caucasian languages formed a single family called Japhetic, which he termed Japhetic, from the sons of another son of Noah from the Bible, and that was related to what was then called the Hamito-Semitic family, named after Ham and Shem, but now we call it Afro-Asiatic as well as Basque. This we supposed to have, he thought, was pervaded prehistoric Europe, and he thought that this language is reflected in the language of the lower strata. These parts are proved utterly false. Have no bearing. He applied. He was very enthusiastic about the Bolshevik Revolution. And he tied this in with some pseudo-Marxism. He said that language is part of the superstructure. You know, you have the productive forces, and then it's reflected on like the state institutions. That after socialism, the victory of socialist revolution, there will be a new single language. That's what his political thrust was. And he rejected the comparative historical method. And he, this is not in the book, but he also had some theories like the agglutinative structure of Mongolian, which is similar to Turkic languages. You have string of suffixes to a root. And he attributes that to cattle herding, whereas we estimate that these Mongolian and Turkic and so on and so forth date to a very early period beyond 10,000 years. But whereas cattle herding comes after agriculture. So many of these, now unfortunately he because of his enthusiasm of the Bolshevik Revolution, and also because he somehow tied this in with a vulgar Marxism, he gained political favor, and he sort of repressed the development of Soviet linguistics. Later on, let me add, Soviet linguistics flourished and produced many valuable people and gave very valuable insights. But nevertheless, again, he did a valuable gathering of facts. Now, Stalin's response, and he likely consulted other linguists in this matter, and he also weighed in on his Marxism, and these that the Mars theory that originally the language originated from gestures and vocal language is false. You don't make one of the characteristics, let me add, of language is that from a limited number of by themselves meaningless elements, you could express theoretically an unlimited number of describe an unlimited number of situations. That doesn't come out with gestures. That's not. And also, he felt that the sort of the what's called the jargon of the class dialects, what linguists called sociolects, they're really dependent on the the national language. They don't constitute Oxford English and Cockney may sound different, but they still they're still dependent on the same, essentially the same grammar and the same fundamental vocabulary. This now it's called received pronunciation. Those they differ in details, not and also jargon, things that are important for the ruling class may be different than what's. But these don't constitute a language by themselves. They are dependent. A language is how various social classes interact with each other. They depend. I mean, the boss or the landlord. The boss has to give orders to the worker. The worker has to express things to the boss, or similarly, if the landlord to the peasant. It is something that pervades, it cuts across the classes of a political entity, of a nation. And they interact with each other. You can't have capitalism without workers, and they need a common language. So it's not a part of the, it does not fundamentally change with social revolution. Of course, social revolution creates new concepts, new terminology, but that's still not change the vocabulary of everyday life. I mean, you have new institutions and so on and so forth. Those are expressed new concepts of communism, democracy. These things they're produced, but that's not the everyday needs of after the great October Socialist Revolution. Russians still appreciate Pushkin and Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. The French still appreciate Molière and so on and so forth. So these do not change. There is continuity. Some likened it to the instruments of production, but they don't produce, language does not produce wealth by itself. The instruments of production do. So it's not, that's not a exact, it's a thing in and of its and the superstructure changes in the development of productive forces, and not immediately and not directly, but only after changes in the base. Language, on the other hand, is connected with, these are quotes, with man's productive activity directly, and not only with, but with all his other activities in all spheres of work. For this reason, language reflects changes in production immediately and directly without waiting for changes. I mean, when there's a new machine or a new tool, new electronic equipment, and so on and so forth. They enter, but so these what he calls dialects and jargons, as sociologists, linguists use the term sociolects. They don't consider because they rely on the grammatical system and word stock of their of the national language, and they are for by themselves. They don't work for society as a whole. Unlike what Marr was pushing for, that after socialist revolution there will be all the national languages will be swept away. But that's untrue. Actually, the opposite happened, because socialist revolution did away with or struggled to do away with national prejudices and hierarchies, and actually the number of languages in Russia increased, because many of the nationalities were allowed to express themselves in their own language. Now, true, after communism, the highest stage of socialism, where it's to each, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs, technology develops, and this occurs globally. Imperialism ends, and so on and so forth, and then by interaction, gradually, maybe a truly universal language may develop. So there was it was against Stalin weighs in against that we should overhaul Russian, make a big overhaul of the Russian language after because of the socialist revolution. Now, okay, let me contrast this with the nationalist perspective. It's not dealt in the book, but I'm adding to as a contrast. Well, it's it was developed by actually Herder and Fichte in the turn of the 19th and late 80s, turn of the 19th century in Germany, and it's, tell you why in Germany. Well, anyway, Herder's view was that each language represents a whole new different way of thinking. Now, true, there's sometimes a dialectical relationship between the language you use and your how you think, but actually languages are, as Chomsky has shown, Chomsky has been criticized for many things, but and this is right, that all these languages actually have the same basic structure, just expressed differently. Now, for example, Turkish has lots of cases, and also Latin, accusative, genitive, dative, where there's a direct object and indirect object, and whereas English express these in preposition. Now, actually, English does have cases, case, just like a Turkish or Finnish or Hungarian. It's just that they're expressive. They're expressed in the position of the word in the sentence. People think in those terms. This is Chomsky's important contribution. So what he Herder and more vulgarly Fichte he advocated is that the world, well, Herder said that, well, the world is divided into various climes. This, he was not quite a racist, but it was later racialized. And these represent a whole way of thinking. So his view is that the whole Roman Empire was degenerate and Latinized, and it had introduced non-German elements. So these Latin words have to be replaced by genuine German, or what's taught as like if you read scientific work in German, you will see that many of the familiar terms like oxygen, many of the familiar terms, scientific terms that are almost universal, are expressed differently. They're expressed in German. I don't know German, but when I try to read reading a scientific paper in German is quite difficult because even if you don't know the language in of scientific paper, in most languages, you immediately recognize familiar Greek and Latin-based words. Let me explain the Marxist analysis of this. Where did this come about? Now, the German capitalism, when it emerged, it emerged at the time when it was losing its revolutionary potential. It feared a revolution, and Marx in his works elaborates this. That revolution would be taken over by the proletariat. So they allied with themselves with the former feudal, the Junkers, and so on and so forth. So, but they needed they also wanted they couldn't have the feudal system overthrown. They had to make an alliance, give them a place. Well, the common element is speaking German, and besides, there was no coherent political entity called Germany, but there were these various states that spoke German. So invoking a common language was the main ideological tool. And in France, there was a single state, and the revolution occurred when the bourgeoisie was at revolutionary stage, when it mobilized the masses in the Great French Revolution. Now, maybe Turks might find this familiar. Textbooks when they criticize the Ottoman Empire, or when many they criticize being un-Turkish, that it's Arabized or Persianized. They don't say, look, it's a stagnant, feudal, undemocratic country. Why? Because the revolution in Turkey also was an imperfect revolution. It kept part of the former feudal classes. It didn't develop, it was very much top down, so it didn't mobilize the masses as in to the extent in France. I mean, of course, it mobilized against colonialism, but and there are differences between Germany and Turkey, but the choice of this ideology, which dates to the Young Turks, Ziya Gökalp, is very much, and one of the targets is the Ottoman language that is replete with Arabic and Persian words. There are historical reasons why the literary language was excessively inundated with these. Well, one, because the Arabic and Persian style poetry was in vogue, and you cannot fit many ordinary Turkish words into those meters. My grandfather, my paternal grandfather, who was a very interesting character, he was a military doctor that became a physics teacher. There was also a poet, and he tried to invent new meters suitable for Turkish. So the classical Ottoman poetry is inundated with Arabic and Persian words, because if you use Turkish words, many of the Turkish words don't, or Turkish origin words don't fit. But I know the speech of my a grandmother who was culturally conservative, and I have no problem understanding her. She knew her grandfather, so maybe more than maybe 200 years, about 200 years ago, I know the Turkish, and this, I'm quoting Professor Fire, the late Professor Fire is on this matter. So this became a popular. We know of this history a little bit, I'll tell you, because I was reading the works of Sateh al-Husri. He was the ideologue of, he became the ideologue of Turkish nationalism, but he was, before that, during Ottoman times, he was an Ottoman gentleman, mid-level government functionary, with liberal views, and he debated on this issue with Ziya Gökalp. Now, he was appalled at the way France treated Syria, which France, which claimed to be the was known as the the leading voice of democracy and republicanism, and well, what did they do with Syria? They devastated it. Syria declared itself independent under Faisal, but French troops occupied Syria. So Sateh al-Husri moved away from this liberal view and adopted the view of Ziya Gökalp, but since he was a latecomer in his works, he gave references to these. And usually nationalists don't like to give references to other to the works of other people, just because they're nationalists. Okay, now let me. Excuse me, I said. Forgot the R here, the USSR and the Russian Federation. In the USSR, well, partly under the influence of Marx, there was briefly a push for Latinization that was dropped. But life was given to the languages that previously some of them didn't have a written language. They were studied. They were elevated to the status of the many official languages of the USSR. Like in Turkmenistan, in any republic, there were both Russian schools and schools in the local language, but the Russian schools had to teach the language of the republic. So the ethnic Russian, the native Russian speakers also learned well the language of the republic. It was a very liberal, one of the most liberal national linguistic policies in the world. Then was partly inspired by Switzerland, but putting this into effect was truly a genius. Russian Federation, now things are not so democratic. The Russian is the official language for state work. Whereas the instruction in the local language was always done. Now you have to petition for instruction in that language, even if say you're in the Tatarstan Republic, you have to petition that, well, there's sufficient demand for instruction, and otherwise, and people, since Russian is so overwhelmingly favored, people don't tend to have their children instructed in the local language. It won't help them in the getting jobs in the future. Of course, these were not problems under socialism. So Russian Federation is, I think, a step backward. So Russian Federation is a capitalist. It's not socialist. Needless to say, but well, some people don't realize that. In China, it was similar to Soviet Union, but there was a debate whether the Chinese dialects should be given the status of local languages. Some I actually favor that. Now, in the writing system sweeps under the rug most of the differences. Now, these dialects, what are called dialects of Chinese, are apparently some are more divergent than the various Slavic languages. And when I see in sometimes images of China for China-wide conferences, everybody has earphones for simultaneous translation in case they're not proficient in what's called Putong Hua, a common language. It's called Guohua in breakaway Taiwan province, meaning national language. And theoretically, it should incorporate many of Putong Hua should incorporate features of many or vocabulary from many dialects, but it's mainly based on the Beijing. However, this was because Han people felt that they were one nation, and in the early 20th century, China was fragmented, and so this would bring unity. However, the national languages, languages of non-Han people, were protected and given the light of day. There is one nationality that's called the Wei nationality, which is not based on a separate language. It's called it's the Chinese, the Han Muslims, not the like Turkic, and there's some Iranian speaking Muslims in China, but there are also Chinese Muslims, but they are given a separate nationality status, even though they use the standard language. Now non-socialist countries have practiced basically linguistic nationalism. In Turkey, the Lausanne Treaty guarantees that every citizen of Turkey may use their language. However, it is embedded in the sections dealing with religious freedom. The government interpretation of this is that the languages of non-Muslims may be taught, but this does not apply to like Kurdish or Assyrian or Arabic. Well, Arabic is taught. Standard Arabic is taught as part of religious education, but and also the now non-official use has been relaxed. I went to with my friend Bill here to a tour of the republics of the Soviet Union, mainly Turkic republics, and I use my Turkological knowledge to communicate with people. It was very interesting. There was not yet glasnost or perestroika. Because Gorbachev had just become general secretary, but the party congress had not yet taken place. Next year, we went to a tour of southeastern Turkey, mainly Kurdish region. This was in 1985, 86, I think. There was still basically military rule, and like when we visited people, people were very much. It was tense. People were afraid of each other. They didn't even a personal use of Kurdish in Kurdish discourse was could be met by a fine or imprisonment or worse. Nowadays, non-official use of Kurdish is tolerated, but it's still far from a pluralistic society. Now, in addition, in Turkey followed this German notion that now true, the high literary language, Ottoman language, Ottoman Turkish language is difficult. That's true. You need a high level of education for that. Actually, Mustafa Kemal himself was a master of it. But there was a policy again that the Ottoman Empire had degenerated because it had moved away from being a truly Turkish, and eventually nowadays even many common words, widely understood words of Arabic and Persian origin are being replaced. And moreover, unfortunately, they're being replaced by invented by people who are not, who don't have really competency in Turkish morphology and grammar and history. They misread the old Turkic texts. Bitik was proposed for a book. Now, in Old Turkic, it was actually bitig. And this, the natural evolution in the Turkish of Anatolia would be biti, and this was in fact used as for the meaning of a letter until the beginning of the 19th century. But the person who coined it was not aware of this, and moreover misread the old Turkic text. So this is one example, and I could give other examples. Well, one example that drives me crazy is this pervasive use of tüm instead of for all, even for a bütün, which is understood by all Turkic people, almost all Turkic people, meaning all, it's replacing a Turkish word, a very well-rooted old Turkic word, with a word that is very rarely found in some early medieval Central Asian texts, and its origin is obscure. Even if it was pronounced tüm at the time, I would put into doubt. It's really crazy. Now, unfortunately, this has become a symbol of being progressive and Kemalist. Now, Mustafa Kemal himself, when he first initiated a very radical overhaul of Turkish, he tried to make a speech with it, and it was a disaster. Whereas he was a master of the Ottoman language, and also a very racy colloquial. You know, when he was angry at somebody, according to the situation, he could, you know, give an answer in the quote unquote street talk. So what they came up with is the Sun language theory based on, again, this is resembling Mars theory that all language originated from a single syllable ah. And somehow this was originally Turkish, and all languages originated from Turkish. Well, okay, since all languages originate from Turkish, it was basically okay to use any word derived from a foreign language, because after all, that was Turkish returning back to Turkish. And unfortunately, this has become a symbol of being progressive because it's a mistaken association with Kemal. Kemal actually did away with this radical reform. I don't know, the left is infatuated. My comrades, many of my dear comrades are infatuated with it. And I think this is a little unfortunate, and I wish they would read Stalin's very sober, this very sober work. Another example was of linguistic engineering is Norway. Norway declared independence from Denmark. I think it was in the 19th century. And Danish had become all pervasive, and two different language literary standards were. One was basically Norwegianized Danish, that's called bokmål, and the other derived from more dialects of the coast, northern coast, which reflected the old, was more conservative, resembled Old Norse more. Finally, I'd like to make observations in the Arab world. And nowadays, let me say that Iraq, Algeria, and Morocco have recognized local languages. In Iraq, Kurdish and Turkmen and Assyrian, and well, what's actually now Aramaic, it's mistakenly called Assyrian. And in Algeria and Morocco, Amazigh, which is previously known as Berber. There's slightly different variations of Berber, but they made a sort of Algeria and Morocco made two separate standards. That's just why it could be comprehensible. But more interesting is its attitude towards Arabic. Now, spoken Arabic and standard Arabic are quite different. Analogy would be like Latin and Italian. The standard Arabic that's pervasively understood, taught rather in the Arab world, but it's not a native language of none. It hasn't changed too much in terms of basic grammar and basic vocabulary. Of course, new words like like communism, democracy, all these things have been liberation. They have been added and coined, and also a word for various technological innovations. But the basic vocabulary and grammar remains. So that has been favored. The reason was that the colonial powers favored suppressed the teaching of Arabic, particularly the French in Algeria, but also the British attempted in Egypt in favor, and some, at least in Egypt and Lebanon, where attempts were made to make a local standard from the local dialect, which makes understanding it a little more difficult. They're not too different, actually. If you have some, if you know the language well, but when you make it into a standard, then differences arise. Now, because it was associated with colonial attempts to divide the Arab world, that were pretty much successful, at least in other areas. This path of standardizing the spoken language has not been taken up, and it is favored by in social media and sort of vaguely progressive people involved in these protests that use social media a lot. Much of texting, tweeting, and what have you are done in the colloquial local dialect. So our political cartoons, the dialects have never been entirely suppressed. Some popular literature, like the Arabian Nights, has elements of colloquial Arabic. Also, the light, serious literature, like the works of Usama bin Munqidh. He was a knight. The local ruler was dealing with the Crusaders. And he sent this knight, this poet, he was also a well-known poet, as an ambassador, and he wrote his experiences in the Crusader state. And there he, while reading him, I was actually surprised that to find elements of the Syrian dialect, because he was a very well-educated man. This cannot be mistakes. Similarly, actually, Evliya Çelebi writes in what at the time was considered quite plain Turkish, and also he also introduced some talks like a half-educated person, like putting Persian plurals in Turkish words. Of course, Evliya Çelebi was also a very well-educated man. These are and the spelling. He adds the vowel letters in Arabic words where there shouldn't be. Of course, he would get, if he did this as a student, he would get a sound beating of the soles with a stick, palaka. But to mark his, to lighten up the mood, he in his work he does that. So anyway, these are some of the policies that are implemented both by some by both socialist states and liberation movement, shall I say. So, okay, I think that's end of the formal presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Yusuf, a very interesting presentation. Before we go to questions, we will spend a few minutes on announcements, and I'll turn over the meeting to Jean Rule. Maybe you can tell us what's coming up in future meetings.
Well, I can try. And thank you, Yusuf, for a very exhaustive and informative discussion of this very, very important topic. And I'm sure we all have questions and comments. I know I do. So I'm looking forward to that. But coming up, we have some interesting programs coming up. Next week is Turkey 2023, the collapse. And I think that's going to refer primarily to the socio-political collapse and not the recent earthquake, but that may be touched upon too. And Mehmet, do you want to say anything about that? You're our speaker.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, next week we're going to be talking about the social and political collapse of Turkey. And unfortunately, the earthquake came and demonstrated this last week. So we will be going deep into how they are actually related, how the whole state structure, the political structure completely collapsed on top of what was happening historically in the last few years. And thank you, Yusuf, for your contribution today. Yusuf and I will be presenting. Yusuf gave a very good presentation last week about the elections, upcoming elections. We don't even know if they're going to happen anymore on May 14th, but how the left has situated itself and the problems with the election and everything. So he's going to be bringing that information to the meeting as well. And we'll talk a lot about the earthquake and the total collapse. Thank you.
Well, thank God we have no such problems here in the United States. So let's go on. And then following that, on February 26th, we have a talk on the Wilmington 10 on state repression and African-American politics in the 1970s, which are still very relevant. That's coming up on the February 26th. March 5th and 12th, we're still working on the possibilities. We have a number of excellent things we're kind of trying to firm up. And on March 19th, we will have Scott Ritter, the military analyst, will be speaking. I think this will be in person, and it'll be at the library itself. It'll be a hybrid session, I believe. So that should be very good. So that's what's coming up. And I'll again remind you, if you don't receive, if you want to get on our mailing list, you can subscribe at our website, ICSSmarx.org, which also has information, because I know you are all wanting to give us money. But Richard, it's back to you.
Thank you, Gene. And now we'll go into questions and answers and comments. If you want to participate, raise your hand through the reaction tab below on your screen. You can raise your hand that way. We ask you to keep your questions and comments to about 2 minutes, and so that we can get as many people as possible. We'll run through the people who haven't spoken first, and then people, when that's done, we'll go back to whoever wants to speak again, and we'll run till about 50 minutes from now, from to 12:30 Pacific time. So we already have some people already with their hands up, beginning with Sharon Rose, Raj Sahai, Mehmet Behram, and Jean Rule. So go ahead, Sharon.
Thank you. I think that Yusuf is trying to tell us that this question is extremely important today as well as in the past. And I agree. I would like to say a little more, though, about the political context of why Stalin wrote this and why he was telling us that we should care. He wrote the article about linguistics in 1950, which was 37 years after he'd written his first book, Marxism and the National Question. or was it? Anyway, and those two works are very much connected with each other. So in the Leninist view of what a nation is, among other criteria such as a contiguous land area, a common economy, and a common culture, is the notion of a common language. Those are the criteria that are usually used to discuss what is a nation or who is a nation, who gets to be qualified as a national minority living elsewhere. And that's very relevant to building socialism in the vast, huge Eurasian continent that encompassed the USSR, that the USSR encompassed. And so Stalin was reiterating that, but he also was arguing against ultra-leftism in the Soviet Academy. And ultra-leftism and just complete ignorance and wrong-headedness and unscientific so-called method, which was, I think Yusuf illustrated that. Mar was the main example of that in this pamphlet that Stalin wrote. There are other examples. There was a big fight in the area of biology where somebody named Lysenko was responsible for the development of Soviet agriculture, or the lack of development. And his views have been since then debunked. And I don't know much about that, but I do know that it was a big controversy. And Stalin was arguing for the use of the correct scientific method. And in particular, what does dialectics have to do with facts? So some people said dialectics comes first and the facts follow from that. And Stalin said that was wrong, that it's the opposite. And I think that's very relevant to us today in trying to raise among our people that the use of dialectical historical materialism is the way to figure out the road forward in all ways of life. So I will stop there, but I just want to add that the question of the national question, from the point of view of the USSR, is very important to study, but in particular, the Jewish people are a very good example of what went right and what went wrong, and the history of the Nazi genocide and its relationship to the establishment of the apartheid state of Israel is a national question, in my opinion, or it can be looked at from the point of view of a national question. And the history of the Soviets trying to establish a Jewish autonomous area in Azerbaijan, which did not work, which came before the Nazis came to power, or at the same time as the Nazis came to power, is very important as well. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yes, well, in the book, actually, he does, Stalin does rail against dogmatism and treating Marxism as a dogma and mechanically reaching conclusions that it's a science and it evolves according to conditions. He gives the example of Marx, who felt that there will be a simultaneous revolution in Europe, and whereas Lenin saw that when capitalism reached the stage of imperialism, it opened the way for revolutions in other countries like Russia. Actually, that's what we do in science, as we encounter in science, for example, that when we make new measurements, more accurate measurements, we discover new phenomena, but it's still it's the basic methodology and concepts of the previous stage remain still become relevant. That's why we grill students, to the hilt in freshman year on Newtonian physics. We don't say, oh, this is also planted by relativity and quantum mechanics. No, we don't say. You have to be a very well adapted Newtonian physics to go to modern physics. And it's the same in Marxism. You have to know Marx, but also the developments later on. And Stalin rails against this, the dogmatic and vulgar towards Marxism. And when one quotes Lenin or Marx or Engels, one must bear in mind what they are talking about, the context they were talking about, where they're talking about the stage of communism or the stage of just after socialist revolution, and whether it's the age of imperialism or not, and so on. Yes, that's very true. And Stalin was very concerned about he was Commissar for Nationalities, and originally, and the national question did occupy much of his theoretical work, and made valuable contributions. And interestingly, he recognized African Americans as a separate nationality. An argument was made during that time by an American communist,
Okay.
Please go.
Okay.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Next is Raj. Go ahead, Raj.
Thank you, Yusuf. Unfortunately, I had not read Stalin's essay on this, so I'm trying to grasp it through your talk. So thank you very much for introducing me to this topic. It's very much related to India's emergence as a united country, because like Russia, India is multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-linguistic, and multi-national country. And Russia was the USSR was the same. And some of the lessons of USSR India, how USSR disintegrated along national lines. And the interesting thing was, and language very much, as Sharon has pointed out, language represents culture of, it's tied to the culture of the people who live in area. The common culture and language are very much related. And suppression of language is really an oppression. So I think when under Stalin, basically under Bolsheviks, and Stalin had a very big role in building the USSR, because he was the commissar of nationalities, and the language question was part of it. So in Soviet Union, languages were encouraged in oppressed nationalities to develop culture and modernize. They didn't accept the practices of oppression of women and all kinds of bad practices they had, but they gave authenticity to their common cultural heritage, and they flowered. And it seems to me that it was the Russian nationalism under Yeltsin that destroyed the USSR. They asserted Russian nationalism, which seems to be somewhat contained by Putin in Russia, but you're suggesting that actually is not the case. So I'd like to know your comments on that, and also how is this related to the Ukrainian nationalism that we're seeing today? Is any of what you're saying, how would you analyze that? Is there any of this applicable there? Thank you.
Well, in regards to India, I believe has a very admirable policy of three language policy: Hindi, English, and local language. And if you're in a Hindi state, you have to learn some local language, if I'm correct.
Actually, that was what was promised, but then there's cheating going on. The Hindi is the biggest area of Hindi speaking, and thanks to Bombay sex and violence movies, Hindi has become just like Shakespeare did sex and violence to teach English, and so did Bombay cinema. But under nationalism today, they're pushing Hindi. And that's what Narendra Modi's language is not Hindi. But he is a great promoter of Hindi, speaks very powerfully in Hindi. Of course, he's a right-wing bourgeois. So he's extremely damaging to the sentiments of not only Muslims, but a lot of minorities, Kashmiris and others, because they're ramroding it. But I want to, so they have actually degraded it. Now, under Congress, it was different. That's when a three-language formula came, because South Indians were actually protesting why their language was not recognized. There are many excellent languages of the South. They formed the Dravidian language, that you know about that, I think, and versus the Aryan versus Dravidian. That's the divide in languages in India. And in the north, it is Aryan, and in the south, it's Dravidian. So, and this Aryan is actually related to what is known as the Indo-Germanic family of languages.
It's called Indo-European, preferably.
Or Indo-European. Okay, Indo-European, but
it's called Indo-German, but Indo-European.
But it's closer. Hindi is, Sanskrit is closer to German than other European languages like English.
I don't think so. Some say so, but I don't believe so. And the position of Germanic is, I don't think it has been said. I'm not an Indo-Europeanist, so I can't. But it's very close to the languages of Iran, Persian, Kurdish, Pashto, and so on and so forth.
But Iranian is, yes, that's true. But let me come back to your question about USSR and Ukraine. Could you please address that?
Yeah, well, no, I wanted to emphasize that, no, Russia still has a multi-language policy, much better than what is imposed by the post 2014 coup, where Russian is a significant portion of the population speaks Russian, and Russian is suppressed. No, but as I said,
in Ukraine, you mean?
In Ukraine, but Russia still has a multi. But I just want to emphasize it's not as progressive as during the USSR. As for dissolution of the Soviet Union, actually the nationalities such as the Turkmens, Uzbek, and so on and so forth, they actually were the ones that were most favored the Soviet Union, and there was a and people overwhelmingly favored the continuation of the Soviet Union. What happened is that the Baltic states and the the places like Turkmenistan were considered hardship regions. Actually, were higher in salaries were higher in those republics, and the ones that were more industrialized felt that they were giving when the centralized economy weakened, they were feeling that they didn't want to subsidize these republics. So as I said earlier in another session, it's like Staten Island, when Staten Island went from New York on the grounds that it was subsidized Bronx and Brooklyn. So yeah, yes, that's basically what happened. And then for these multinational, linguistic societies to work, you need a central authority to assure equality and planning. It doesn't work very well in a capitalist economy where, or in a decentralized state. When the central the state in Yugoslavia was removed, well, there was disaster. I mean, as you well know. So that's why some people in Turkey favor very much the Murray Bookchin model of a completely autonomous cantons, as they call it, and if implemented, what would lead to is that the more productive, quote unquote, cantons will suppress the and outcompete the other one. So I believe that that is you need a centralized state to ensure equality.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. The next is Mehmet, followed by Jean, followed by Janet, followed by Bill Doris. Go ahead, Mehmet.
Thank you, Yusuf. Great presentation and very thought-provoking. I just wanted to go back to a little bit of the modern Turkish Republic history, how the language was used for a nation building. And as you know, in 1928, the Turkish alphabet was changed, not Turkish itself, but the alphabet itself was changed from Arabic to Roman alphabet. I don't know if, my question is, do you think that this contributed anything to the progress that the Republic brought? But I would like to emphasize that following it, there were several campaigns of forcing people to speak Turkish. And a campaign was Citizens Speak Turkish. This was used for racist attacks on the Jews, the Greeks, the Armenians, whatever was left in Turkey of the previously peoples of Ottomans, to get a pure Turkish, racially, charged country and to drive them out. So it was very interesting to see this. And one more thing is that when the alphabet changed, we were kind of cut off from our history. I know this is the right wing brings that one up, but it's very interesting because in our discussions with some of my friends, we were talking about the Armenian genocide. And I wanted to bring many documents from early. I mean, this is as early as when my grandfather was alive and my father was born. and I could not, because all of the documents were in Arabic, Turkish. Turkish was the same, but the alphabet was different. So I could not bring any documents. I did not understand any documents. Nobody could. We needed a translator. So I would like to hear your opinions on this, the alphabet change and the purity of the language being forced by a government that brings it to a racist, campaign.
Well, the change was that was a rational decision and a positive decision. I have nothing against that. No, in the way the Persian Arabic alphabet was applied to Ottoman, the fundamental differences in sound were not expressed. If you write Mahmut Pasha öldü and Mahmut Pasha oldu are written the same in traditional script. Now they tried to introduce, starting most notably by Enver Pasha.
Let me just translate what you said. So if you write in Arabic, you said so-and-so general died and so-and-so general said are written exactly the same?
If Mahmud Pasha died, Pasha is a sort of honor title given to generals and other important people. And if you Mahmud became a Pasha, it would be written the same. So one cure for that is now Arabic words were written, Arabic and Persian words were written more or less in their original spelling. So one cure for that is, well, you will avoid such Turkish sentences altogether, and in writing you would use Arabic or Persian equivalents. Enver tried to introduce these particularly vowel differences into the writing. He did it during World War I, when the field officers were in dire straits and getting used to receiving he made it his alphabet required for military communications, and the field officer said, "Look, this is not what Binbaşı İsmet, later İsmet Pasha famously said, harp zamanı değildir. The time of war is not the time for letters." Because getting orders maybe be better, more explicitly expressed, but in a very unfamiliar form, and they had to first rewrite it in the traditional script, and that was just too much when you're in the trenches in dire straits. Erratically modified Arabic-based scripts were introduced in this Soviet Union in the 1920s, but neither the traditionalists nor the reformers were satisfied. Actually, Cyrillic was quite well adapted. This writing survives in Xinjiang province, China, to write Uyghur and a few other Turkic languages. It's also the way the Arabic script based Kurdish is written in Iraq, Sorani Kurdish. Now you could
Okay.
neither the reformers nor the traditionalists were satisfied with that. So, yeah, but however, I do believe that some minimal education should be done, should be introduced in high school. It's now introduced as an elective. You don't have to. Not saying people should be an expert on that. But I think that it's a good thing that in Soviet Union, actually, the traditional old Uzbek and Arabic-based script survives, and probably still does survives for religious purposes, actually. They felt this was not an affair of the state. I mean, religion is a personal matter, and they write any way they wish.
Yeah.
And like books in printed in Soviet Union, when they give a reference to something in Arabic script, they give it the original reference. Now in Turkey, what's bad is that everything is done in transcription, and you're not sure. That's sometimes maybe the matter of opinion, the way somebody reads it, and moreover, worse, they translate it into this new Turkish, and so you really are not sure what Atatürk said. Said at this period that some of the nuances of Ottoman Turkish are lost, like millet in Ottoman times. It meant one, a religious community, and a nationality. These three, all three meanings were known, and also meant the general people, and that's why it was milli mücadele, the national struggle. But some people interpret it as national struggle. Some people interpret it as the struggle of the religious community, the conservative allies, Kemal, and the radical leftist allies interpret it as the popular struggle. So that content. Now, if you translate that into ulusal mücadele, you're giving a specific interpretation of that, which was not present at the time. So that's quite hazardous.
Okay, thank you. Next one is Jean Rule.
Oh, okay.
Followed
Well,
by Janet. And
thank you so much. And again, it's depressing when you see how much wrong linguistic policy, how much suffering this can create for people. And I'm thinking particularly about the scandals about the Catholic schools that Indians, Native Americans were forced to go to. So basically they could beat the Indian out of them and they could become decent white people, basically. So, that's not the only example.
They've done the same thing about Black children in school.
Right. But I wanted to ask a different question, because Marx and Engels were very concerned about what makes us human. Why are we different than the apes? And their answer was summed up in a little work by Engels, the part played by labor in the transition from ape to man, where he says that first comes labor, after it language. These were the two essential stimuli under which the brain of the ape turned into the brain of man. Again, this is something that I think is, substantiated by the archaeological record in which we have. We can see how labor developed from early stone tools, more complex into the bronze, iron, and so forth. But we can't see that evolution in the development of language. When that developed, we don't know when it occurred, but certainly that was a crucial thing that changes us from apes into human beings, and that's one of the distinctive features we have. So I don't know if you are familiar with that book, that article. by Engels or not. And if,
No, you could email me and I'll look at it. Thank you very much for
yeah,
pointing
I
that
will
out.
email that to you. Actually, I wrote a paper on that, so I'll email you the paper and the.
Okay. Let me add, we don't have a theory of the evolution of language. Probably it's a widely accepted conjecture. It's not entirely proven that, well, since Homo sapiens has basically a single origin, language has a single origin. And if we try to reconstruct, no matter how far back, we still get a regular language. We don't get, these bow wow theories of Marr and this Austrian Krajcic, who was responsible for the origin, that Turkish was the original language. Chomsky has the view that you either have the a language gene or you don't. Only Homo sapiens has it. But that's a very anti-evolutionary view. How did that gene come about? It's that it came about by some very fortuitous chance of a mutation by a cosmic ray, highly unlikely and unsatisfying. So we have yet to have a theory of the evolution of language. Homo neanderthalensis, Homo habilis and Homo neanderthalensis had a hyroid bone, the one that in your voice box that I speak. So we presume they had some form of language. Homo neanderthalensis, the reconstruction of the Homo neanderthalis vocal apparatus means that they produce sounds quite different. They would sound quite different to us, more shrill, in fact.
We anthropologists, say there's no such thing as a primitive language. All languages we know are equally complex, and I think
that's true. Yes.
Confucius and the Macedonian swineherd and the Assam headhunter all are equally complex. So I think
that's true.
I just want to thank you for this and
artistic. All are equally artistic and artists in their communities.
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean. Maybe in Arabic you could specify a camel at a certain age and for a certain function and a certain sex with a single word, but language you could express that in many words, but it's still the same. You could all languages have the ability to form from basically by themselves meaningless elements, theoretically infinite expressions.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, the next is Janet. Go ahead, Janet.
Yes.
Followed by Bill, who seems to have dropped off, but it's certainly
sorry, no, I'm here. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Janet.
Yes, hi, thank you. Thank you, Yusuf. And Norma, please don't interrupt me. Okay, so a whole bunch of things have come to mind from hearing this presentation. First, I mean, a language gene, I think about birds and whales. There's some kind of language. I mean, other animals too, there's some form of language there, I believe. There would also, it's like the terminology that has been brought up today, classical, standard, official language versus informal, common, colloquial. Anyway, I'm a little bit confused about that. Maybe I misunderstood that you were talking about language, or Stalin, language developing through labor. I'm wondering about language in the home, domestic, let's say. Was that a whole different language, or and another, I'm kind of jumping around, genocide. I think I can't remember who brought that up, but Armenian genocide. Well, what about the genocide that's being attempted in the Donbass, Ukraine, trying to eliminate the Russian language being spoken there? And what effect does that have on that population, or would that have on that population, or on any population where a language is forbidden? And then I'm curious about the Russian language since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Has it changed? And I don't know whether it's capitalist influence or whatever, but what about that? And then finally, thinking about the deterioration of languages. So especially in the United States, with propaganda, with words being used. I mean, it's the political up means down, or like words like democracy, what meaning do they have? Authoritarianism, fascism, those terms, it's like, what do they mean anymore? And so I see it as the deterioration of language. I don't know about in Russia or elsewhere. I'll stop there.
The whole point of this Stalin's discourse is basically that the basic grammar, the basic stock of words does not change, either from in the speech of various classes or after social transformations. I mean, you have these specialized areas of political vocabulary, related to technology. Those change. Your basic stock of words and basic grammar of discourse, that usually does not, that changes randomly over time, but not radically with social change. Or class groups of people have their specialized usages or fashions among themselves, but those are of a limited sphere. There's in ordinary classes, there is one basic agreed upon language, either by some educational authority, state authority, or just by social convention. That was sound. But now, yes, but the Ukrainian regime is extremely nationalistic, and yes, seeks to, because for political reasons, seeks to eliminate the Russian language from public sphere. That's true.
Yeah. Okay, next one is Bill Doris. Please unmute yourself and even your video too.
Okay, so video.
Thank you.
Yeah, It's well, actually, Yusuf covered most of what I was going to say, but the point was brought up about Russia, Soviet Union nationalities policy, and Russian nationalism being used to break up the USSR. And in fact, it's true. It was broke up from the center. And in the referendum in 1991, rather 1991, the votes for maintaining the Soviet Union were like 90% in the Central Asian republics. They were like 60% in Ukraine. Everywhere had a majority, but it was overwhelming in the national republics. And while Russia has, the Russian government is nationalist and is pushing Russian, that's their perspective. The Soviet nationality structure was was brilliant and complex, whatever mistakes were made, with national republics and autonomous regions, and over 200 languages being taught in schools. And they haven't done away with that entirely in Russia. The Sakha Republic, Yakut, is still an official language in schools, and in Yusuf mentioned Tatarstan, but Tatar is still taught. Of course, most people want to learn Russian because they can get out, they can, do better with Russian, which is not good. But in Ukraine, it's an absolute. It's like they've completely abolished Soviet nationality policy, although the entire legacy. It'd be like if Canada were suddenly to declare that people in Quebec could no longer go to school or go to court. Courts and schools could no longer be conducted in French. And of course, people would rebel and try to secede. And they act like, this came out of nowhere. Like people would not do that if that was done. And that's what was done. Now, of course, most Ukrainians speak Russian to one degree or another, but many identify as Ukrainian, but maybe would rather speak Ukrainian but in the Donbass, it's, people identify ethnically as Russian and would have been happy to be in an autonomous Russian region, but Ukraine, the Kiev regime would not tolerate that. Interestingly, I saw that in Syria, they had Kurdish had not been allowed as an official language in schools, but Armenian, Aramaic, a number of smaller languages were. But I believe 2 years ago, the Syrian government said it would allow the schooling could be conducted in Kurdish in the northeast as well, in the north of Syria as well. I don't know if Yusuf knows more about that. Thank you for a very incredibly comprehensive presentation.
Thank you. Since I agree with you very much, let me respond to Mehmet's point about the Armenian genocide. And one note I encountered, as I mentioned Sattar al-Husri, who was an Ottoman gentleman and a liberal rival of the Young Turks. He was fluent in Turkish. Afterwards, he was sent by the Syrian government to form an alliance with the Kemalist government in Ankara. So, and he mentions this in his memoirs, and so he mentions the people he selects to get in touch with. Now, among them is this Fehmi, I forget his full name, Fehmi Bey. He later became the first interior minister of the Republic. He says, well, I knew this person, and he advocated, while this is pre-World War I, he quotes in Arabic, but I don't know the original Turkish words, but apparently he said, well, the Ottoman Empire, Turkey should expand eastward to become a big pan-Turkic empire. To this end, it should do away with the Arab provinces. The Arabs have their own language. They are Muslim, but they are own language and literature. They're very well developed. They cannot be assimilated. Turkey should give up the Arab provinces. But in between the Turkey and present Turkey and the East lie two non-Turkish nationalities. The Kurds are a Muslim, but they have not a written language, at least not extensively. So it is possible to assimilate them. They should be assimilated into Turkish. The other is the Armenians. They are non-Muslim, and they have a literature, a language of their own. They should be isolated. They should be pushed away. It doesn't go into specifics how, but so there was actually, from this anecdote, a view to get rid of the Armenians. Now, Saturday History Serve illustrates it, since he had adopted the centrality of language in state ideology. He gives this as an example of being put into practice. So I don't think he would be lying, and it's among a people who a group of people he has tried to get in touch with.
Okay. Thank you very much. We have one more question, comment, Laura Wells, and then we'll go to wrap up and end the meeting. So go ahead, Laura.
Thank you for your talk. And some years ago, I was reading books that I noticed that although they didn't seem like they were books about linguistics, the authors were linguists, and that would be, of course, Noam Chomsky, and then there was George Lakoff, and then there was Helena Norberg Hodge, who wrote about the Ladakh people of the Himalayan mountains and how Western civilization came there in a very short period of time, within about 25 years. And it just struck me about how, if I had read Chomsky and didn't know that he was a linguist, I would have thought he was a political science person or whatever. And so my comment or question is just like the relationship. Do people that study linguistics tend toward more open, progressive, socialist policies, or just studying the language? Is there any relationship, do you think, to people?
No, they come in all sorts of colors. There are these, socio-linguistics is linguistics is just a description of languages. It's also, it's a science. You could, like you describe rocks and geology. Now you could apply that to oil exploration, hydrocarbon guzzling, or you could channel it to earthquake prediction, for example. It's morally neutral and politically neutral. But yes, there are right-wing people, these nationalist language engineers, of how to eradicate a language or how to, quote unquote, purify a language, to those who have a liberal and progressive attitude. I disagree with some of the things Chomsky says. He's basically an anarchist, so I cannot fully agree with him, but says many good things. Where his reason for he's not he views he's interested in what's common to all languages, and he sort of in his discourse he sort of denigrates those interests in more specific things like the origins of certain words and so on and so forth. And in one talk, that all these are just impositions of the state. It's in a way it's true, and we say that language is a dialect with the army and the navy. I mean, the attitude of society, like in Yugoslavia, there was just Serbo-Croatian. I mean, along with Macedonian and some Albanian and so on and so forth. But the pervasive language was called Serbo. Be written either in the Latin alphabet or Cyrillic-based alphabet. But when Yugoslavia dissolved, suddenly you appeared Croatian, Bosnian, and Serbian. They're almost all identical. And then came Montenegrin. So we just overnight, we had declaration of 4 different languages that are essentially the same thing. Probably less different than American English and British English. So it depends. Linguists have their political views, but various political views. Just physicists have very progressive physicists in Turkey, particularly physics were the most revolutionary, among the most revolutionary. And then there are people who advise the government here and now other countries about weapons of mass destruction. You find all sorts.
Thank you. Well, we have to wind it up now. I'm sorry to Richard Wright that we're going to leave him till next time. Yusuf, if you wanted to, if you'd like, you want to sum up with some final words that didn't come up in the questions. And
well, I think I covered the main points. I am very much against this linguistic nationalism or advocating that a certain speech is more progressive and or more reactionary. I think we should. There is no reason for us to appreciate the great literary works of the past. We should appreciate Fuzuli just as much as we appreciate Nazım Hikmet, or just as Americans still, Russians have throughout their history appreciate Pushkin, the French appreciated Molière. And we should allow each group to use their language, and maybe when people in the future, maybe something will come about as a universal human language, but that will be in the future only when equality pervades throughout the world. Thank you. And I salute Comrade Stalin for his work.
thank you, and thank you, Comrade Yusuf. And thank you, everybody, for their comments and contributions. And that winds up the meeting for today. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Can I say bye to everybody too?
Okay,
Sure.
bye.
Just
And
did.
see you next week. We'll have
Okay,
a very
see
important
you.
program next week. Look it up. Thank you. Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, at yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.